Madam Speaker, the decisive action we got this week in terms of gun control is exactly the sort of thing you can only get when you have people voting in parties for something that they all get together and agree on. That is not something you get on their side of the house when you're left with a meaningless squabble of MPs who can never agree on anything and never get any meaningful legislation passed in their world. That is not a reality we are proud to stand by. Okay, what do we support in today's debate? The status quo in the MMP type system, where you have multiple parties with different viewpoints and people vote for both their representatives and for the party that is going to represent them. Our burden, we think, in today's debate is to prove that we have a better justified system of democracy and to prove that that results in better democratic outcomes for people who vote. We have 4 points to bring to the House to do that. Firstly, why political parties are a legitimate and better form of representation than individual MPs. Secondly, why we are far better at efficiency in government. And thirdly, how we increase engagement in politics, and that is good. Josh is going to bring you a split point about leadership and how that is better served in the party system. But let's deal with the case brought to us by Isaac, because we thought this was a very flawed case. What did they tell us? Because I'll deal with their third point first, because they sort of brought it into their model as well. They told us that the MPs would vote for the PM, who would choose the cabinet, and that way they'd be able to choose from more people. We think that is exactly the sort of tribalism that they're trying to remove, right? Because if they're saying that the MP, one person, gets to choose all the people in the cabinet, then presumably that's going to be even more biased to whatever that one person wants to have in that cabinet. Going to be even more swayed to the people who are most likely not to resist to whatever he or she says, and least likely to be accountable and good at governing. That first point about how personal politics was more accountable, and they said that MPs would be selected, right? In the status quo, that MPs are selected by select committees, and that's not as good. We tell you that those are probably better quality MPs, right? Because in their world, what you're getting is MPs purely getting in based on how many people vote for them, and not having any checks and balances as to whether they're qualified to be an MP or not. So we don't think that's a world that's conducive to MPs who are good at being MPs, good at passing policies, and good at getting things done. And what we would also say is, if the MPs were so terrible that they shouldn't be a parliament at all, we think these select committees are probably balanced enough and have quite enough views across that party's political spectrum that they're going to not select those people anyway. There it goes. Okay, their final point about the second point about better lawmaking. And they told us that only research departments would be choosing the policies of governments. And most of this rebuttal will be integrated. But I will talk to you about how the party manifesto is something that can be followed, and how the alternative is that nothing gets done at all. Okay, so moving on to my case. Yeah, sure.
Are you fine with bad legislation getting through quickly because party leaders can force it through by strength of the winning system?
Okay, so we wouldn't accept that bad legislation gets through quickly. We would say that probably most legislation, the majority of cases, it is good legislation that is getting through quickly. We think the biggest problem with parliaments around the world today is that they don't get things done fast enough, and we think anything that slows that process down is the most detrimental thing you can do to that system of government. First point, why political parties are a legitimate and better form of representation. Recognise in today's debate that a person's worldview is a large part of their identity, and often they base that on ideals, not on specific people or specific policies. So whether you're progressive or whether you're conservative, whether you're generally for change, but generally for social inclusivity or against that. We also say that no policy exists in a vacuum, so nothing is able to exist as just something you support without supporting the broader mindset behind that. So a progressive approach would apply to multiple policies in a progressive manner then. Parties enable people to vote for an ideology, to understand the platform that that party is going from, which is important because it allows them to react to new policy changes. Because as a voter, you don't know that everything that's going to be passed in the next 3 years or next 5 years when you vote for that party. But if you know that that party is in line with your beliefs, you can get that assurance that they're going to do what you think is best for you. Now let's compare this to a single MP, who is an individual elected on a first-past-the-post basis. We think that's flawed, first of all, because like nearly half of the people who voted them don't get represented at all, which we think is highly problematic. We'd also say that an individual's views are much more variable than a party's ones are, because obviously your MP's views aren't going to be exactly the same as yours, and when there's only one MP, they're going to just vote on every single thing that they believe in, which is going to be far different to your mindset rather than a party would doing it. So inherently, your representation is a lot less accurate when an MP is doing that by themselves for you. Second point, on efficiency. And here we have to examine the purpose of democracy, because we think it is to enact the will of the people and to get change passed that helps the people get their will done. Why then? I'm going to split this point into why parties are good and then why individual MPs are bad. So why then are parties good? We have three reasons. Firstly, because parties have manifestos. So people know what their party will do when they vote for a party, because the party's published a list of things that they want to achieve if they get into government or if they stay into government. This gives them direction that people are able to rally behind and able to get positive change from. But what this also means is that parties are able to form a government to deliver on these promises in a way that a single MP would never be able to do, because they cannot get that comfortable majority. Which leads into our second reason here, right? Because once you form a majority in government, you can pass legislation without having to get a majority for every single bill that you're going to pass. We think that will make the process so much slower if you have to debate every single issue like that. Thirdly, what we'd say is in our world, MPs are much more accountable, because those same whips and senior members of parties that they wanted to ridicule, we see these people have to, are keeping MPs in check, making sure that MPs are representing not only their voters' interests, but the interests of the party that they subscribe to, the party that those people voted for as well. Okay, why then are MPs harmful? Firstly, because they're only accountable, single MPs when it's just them. Firstly, because they're only accountable to their local electorate, right? So their incentive is to provide the best, voting, thing that they can say they've done for their local electorate. Why, you can't just dismiss this in their response to your point of information as more local electorate focus is going to be better. Because we think there are issues which need to be dealt on a national level, which would be neglected if no one is willing to step outside of what will get them their votes, okay? Second reason here is that you can't form majorities quickly, right? So the endless arguments and settlements and little alliances that will form between MPs trying to get oh, I agree with this part of the legislation but not this part. That's the sort of thing which delays the process so much so nothing ever gets passed. Thirdly, we'd say the lack of hierarchies within parties results in more endless bickering. So what does this mean at the end of the debate? No change, and the wrong priorities are given to the MPs who are making that little change that they are making. Final point from me on engagement in politics. You have to recognize in today's debate that it's already difficult for political parties to get people engaged in the political system. They make it worse for two reasons. Firstly, because parties act as a signal of what that party represents. So, when you don't have that party, people are less likely to see something that they support, because it's really hard to go and research everything that an MP stands for. Secondly, though, it's very hard for an individual MP to get people motivated, because the same resources that parties have, being able to go and put up billboards, as a collective, is something you simply cannot do by yourself, so you don't get people engaged in the political spectrum. They get voter apathy, they get low turnout, and that's bad for political representation as well. Very, very proud to negate.